Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Wajdi Harzallah. I'm a partner at KPMG, part of the digital strategy practice in the Middle East. And I'm pleased to welcome you today from the UAE to the 2020 CIO Forum. It's great to see some of you again today after last year's CIO Forum. And we look forward to discussing the findings from the CIO survey that we launched this year again. KPMG has been running the global CIO survey in partnership with Harvey Nash for 22 years. And for the second consecutive year, we are also releasing a UAE edition of the CIO survey that brings a local perspective from technology leaders in the UAE. Over the past 22 years of the survey, we have seen changes and shifts following the 2001 dot-com bust, the 2008 financial crisis, and now the COVID-19 pandemic. The mere fact that we are running the CIO Forum virtually this year reaffirms the strengthened role of technology in our organizations and in our lives. This year, our analysis includes data collected prior to the pandemic, as well as during the outbreak. This allowed us to analyze in greater detail the technology shifts as a result of the crisis. Before we discuss the survey findings, I'd like to run you through some organization matters for this session. You'll have the possibility to submit questions during the webinar. I invite you to please type your questions in the chat box on your right. We will try to answer as many as possible at the end of the session. After the session ends, you will be directed to an exit survey. Please do take a minute to complete the survey. Your comments are very valuable to us. Lastly, the session will be recorded, and we will share with you the recording via email within 48 hours. As for the agenda, we will start by discussing the key findings from the CIO survey in about 30 seconds. Then we will have a panel discussion with 4 technology leaders to get first-hand perspective on technology trends during and after the pandemic. And finally, we will take a few questions from the audience. And now, without further ado, I would like to leave the floor to Steve Bates. Steve is Principal and Global Leader of KPMG's CIO Center of Excellence, and he will be sharing with us the salient findings from the 2020 CIO survey. Steve?
Thanks, Wajdi, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you again today. I wish I could be there in person like I was last year, but our hope is we'll be able to do this face-to-face again next year. For those of you I haven't met, as Wajdi says, my name is Steve Bates. I am a partner in KPMG's Technology Consulting Group. I am the firm's global leader of our CIO Center of Excellence. And as mentioned, I'm going to spend the next few minutes going through some of the key findings of this survey. And we've sorted the data today with a particular emphasis on the Lower Gulf region. And then I'm going to comment on some of these as how they compare to some of the global findings as well. As you heard, this survey is in its 22nd year. It's the world's largest survey of its type, both by scale and the number of respondents. And this year we actually ran 2 surveys. So you're going to see a tale of pre-COVID and post-COVID survey results, which is pretty compelling for the findings this year. And I think it offers a lot of insights into what the new reality for the CIO is going to be and the IT function. So let's get started, dive right in. I think that the theme that we picked this year, everything changed, or did it, is extremely relevant. We explored dozens of topics, which you can check out in the full report. Hopefully you've had a chance to read it. This morning, I'm going to share a few of the larger items that we came away with. The themes we're going to cover are board investments and priorities, the growing digital divide, leadership and the influence of the CIO, and focus on people and culture. So let's get started with a view from the top with what our respondents told us was most important for their boards and the management committee. There's no doubt that the pandemic has had a dramatic impact on almost every aspect of business and life, but perhaps most surprisingly out of the survey is that some of the key fundamentals remain. The top two priorities for boards did not change with the onset of COVID-19, both improving operational efficiency and improving customer engagement have both been long-standing priorities of the technology leader, both in the lower Gulf region and globally. And while for some organizations, the crisis has required a radical change in direction, for most, it's more served as an acceleration to what was already in place. And for some, it's actually been useful. For instance, one CIO that I spoke with recently remarked that more innovation has happened in the last 6 months than in the last 10 years. And I think containing costs while retaining customers and keeping employees engaged and productive has definitely dominated the boardroom agenda this year. If we look deeper at where the money is flowing, the short-term reality is that your region in customer experience engagement is dominating the investment portfolio. And on a global level, it's a little different. Security and privacy is the number one concern, where here it's a lower priority in the lower Gulf, largely due, I think, to the modern nature of industries in the region and more advanced capabilities in architecture and cyber maturity. On the customer front, the wholesale disruption of B2B and B2C interaction models, meeting customers where they're at and engaging in more integrated ways, has remained a priority, as you can see here. This portfolio has been near the top of the list for several years. The scale of adopting enterprise SaaS, new ways of working, more advanced analytics, they're definitely accelerating this trend. This is particularly true for the financial services industry, retail, and consumer goods. And then on that third element of efficiency and productivity, infrastructure automation continues to scale beyond the back office. 5 years ago when we did this, the automation story was barely considered as part of the service delivery model. Today, in your region, appears to be the answer to many things. Over 70% of respondents are anticipating an enterprise increase in investment. So one of the most compelling findings in the survey was the large spike in IT spending through the second half of this year. So technology leaders reported a median additional increase of 5% of their overall IT budgets, with 2 in 10 respondents spending more than 20 to 50% more in technology. And in the lower Gulf region, 30% of respondents increased spending between 6 and 20%. And that was nearly 10% bumped up investment by near double that pace. So if you think about it, globally, this amounts to about $15 billion a week in IT spend in the first 3 months of the crisis alone. This is an incredible, unprecedented jump. If you annualize this out, it's going to figure to be about a 20% annual increase. So tech leaders were pretty much given an open checkbook during this first initial 2 quarters of the crisis. But as a result of this, there is a consequence. I think this unprecedented surge in investment, it's completely unforeseen, obviously, left many organizations with a pretty serious headache. And boards, CFOs, and CIOs alike are really looking at longer term investments now, and they're really scrutinizing the existing spend. They're seeking to prove return on investment or make savings where they can quickly. And unlike in previous recessions or crises, where largely all sectors rose and fall together, industry now has played a significant and very decisive role in how organizations have fared during the crisis. On a global basis, what's for sure, looking at expected budget increases, is that powering utilities, government, healthcare, and technology sectors are investing heavily as they deal with a surge. whereas leisure, including airlines and hotels, nonprofit, education, and manufacturing, are starting to rein back as they're adjusting their models. So I'll give you a couple of practical examples here. In primary healthcare, for instance, the mass adoption of video conferencing and telemedicine has introduced really an efficient and effective way to initially consult with patients. And doctors all over the world have long been clamoring for this as a channel. In the pandemic, duly delivered on it. On the flip side, for global universities and higher education, the delivery of their services through a screen has really made people reassess the value of what they're paying for. If you remove the lecture halls, the libraries, sporting events, social events, the bar, student expectations are really changing, and universities are having to revisit their value proposition. Though if you look around the world, they haven't really lowered their tuition fees at this point. Unlike previous years, when most industries, again, followed similar economic trends, this year has charted a profoundly different course towards economic recovery. And as we continue to study the data behind the economic forces, we've been able to look more in detail about the pandemic has had an effect on companies. And for some sectors, organizations are facing the daunting challenge of what we call a hard reset and finding a new viable business model going forward. For others, the channel is to deal with unprecedented amounts of demand. There is a surge happening. And there's a fundamental requirement for many companies to transform their model from a digital to omni-channel classes. So it's a big portion of the population is surge and transformation. The key takeaway here is that most companies are going to face two or more of these patterns simultaneously. And there is a requirement for the CIO to have a very different response in each of these patterns. So it's complex. And forecasting into the future is still very tenuous as a prospect. It's 60% of respondents have said that it's going to be at least 3 to 6 months more before they can begin to start accurately forecasting the next year. So boards and management committees are going to have to get comfortable with a certain level of uncertainty in the market. So over the past several years, we've begun tracking what we call digital leaders. These are about the 3 in 10 companies out there that are highly effective in executing their digital strategy. They're delivering significantly higher market returns based on the data. And in this year's survey, we found that the divide between the digital leader and the followers is likely to increase significantly. And what you're seeing here is that the digital leaders spent more by percentage during the crisis than their competitors. And in the lower Gulf, there's a gap that's particularly apparent at the mid and high end investment ranges, signaling that leading companies here have access to capital and a commitment to create some competitive space in the market. The digital leaders already had a lot of the infrastructure in place to deal with the crisis, and they're simply further down the line in implementing emerging tech at scale, like distributed cloud, software as a service market platforms, IoT, AI, automation, and they're much more likely to be putting their foot on the accelerator when it comes to investing further. And almost half of the digital leaders out there reported that they're highly effective at scaling good ideas and stopping poor ones quickly, compared to just a quarter of all of the other respondents. So we're likely to see this divide grow. Digital leaders are better positioned to pivot and scale into new market opportunities, and they're going to be simply leaving behind organizations that resist or are unable to invest in their innovation journey. So as we move forward, globally, the market leaders are simply laser focused on enabling business outcomes. It's not an IT for IT story. And regardless if the drivers are revenue, OI, efficiency, customer loyalty, brand awareness, lifetime value, the digital leaders are just simply better, outperforming their competitors by double digits in every single meaningful category. And I think it's really important that it's to note that amongst the attributes of these companies, they embrace modern ways of working and architectures at scale. It's not just pockets of good. They're excellent everywhere. They're highly automated. They're very product centric, not project centric. And they really put trust at the center of their design and architecture. And then frankly, just on a funding perspective, they're just better at funding good ideas quickly and shutting down bad ones earlier. So let's move forward to the technology executive itself. We've been tracking the role of the CIO, again, for over 2 decades. And from the times of being just an operator of a silent utility to reshaping the company's strategy, CIOs have perhaps experienced more change in their role than any other C-suite executive out there. But how has COVID factored into this chapter of the technology executive story? Many of them emerge from this exhausted, but they're also excited by the challenges and opportunities of what has become a very technology-centric crisis. Nearly 7 in 10 in the lower Gulf region report feeling more influential than ever as a report of this result of this crisis. But really, this hasn't reflected in being included at the board or executive committee membership, which for CIOs is down from about 71% in 2017 to now 60%. I think it's important to note that I think it's the CIO role rather than the CIO themselves, the actual person who's occupying the role that's experiencing the trend. The people, at least the successful ones that I know at least, are maintaining their senior management team roles, and they're starting to evolve their titles, and they're becoming chief digital officers, transformation officers, CTOs, business heads in many cases. And I'm seeing an increasing number of former CIOs pop up in new places as business leaders all over the world. And traditionally, respondents have ranked employee enablement and culture within the bottom quartile of imperatives. But again, just like everything else this year, that has completely changed with ways of working and culture and people now being amongst the top 3 priorities of all executives. So the past several months has seen an explosion in new ideas about the definition of work itself. So what work gets done, who does it, where it should get done, how it should be done. And there's a bit of a good news, bad news story here. The good news is first, so powered by a huge influx of cloud-enabled collaboration tools, nearly 90% of CIOs in your market feel that the pandemic has increased collaboration between the business and IT teams. And nearly 70% believe that it's creating a more inclusive environment permanently. So that's the good news. On the not so positive side, it's not a surprise that nearly 70% of lower Gulf technology leaders are concerned by the mental health of their team. I think interestingly, it's still nearly 15% lower than the global average, where IT professionals have pulled off stunning transformations, all while dealing with the same pressures of remote working, family care that everyone else has experienced. And I think the survey shows that IT professionals have not seen any increase in significant rewards. They don't see a break in demand. Many are feeling disconnected, unappreciated, and burned out. So unfortunately, in the region itself, only about 25% of CIOs are recognizing the problem and have put in formal programs to support their people. I think over the years, mental health has been a growing concern in the world of IT and technology, but this may be one of those moments that the crisis could deserve more attention that it's getting. On a global average, this is highly accelerated. With half the technology leaders in the respondents reporting that half of their staff are going to become permanent home workers, organizations are beginning to realize this is going to be quite different without location. And in the early stages of the pandemic, when everything was new and there was an urgent job to be done, we saw productivity spike. But now we're entering a longer stretch where we're anticipating that productivity to become a challenge for a lot of the issues I just discussed. I think one of the top, in the skills fronts, one of the top most interesting things is that cybersecurity has topped the poll for the very first time in the survey's history. This is directly correlated to the massive influx in investment in security and privacy that we highlighted earlier. And in the Gulf, attracting and retaining cyber talent skilled in cloud and data privacy and integration is a challenge. Also in your region, it's closely followed by emerging tech skills across the board. We're talking about advanced analytics, AI, cloud, DevOps. Again, so many companies in your region are surge and transformation companies that really require this. And then lastly, on the recruiting front, respondents tell us that the number one thing that candidates are seeking for in your region is a company with a strong culture and leadership. This is more important than training, compensation, or career progression. I think this is just another sign for CIOs that they're going to have to be visible, action-oriented leaders embodying the values that they wish to be seen at. And then beyond there being the right thing to do, when we think about the diversity and a positive effect that it has on business, it simply is promoting better business performance. We see this year and year again. More than 2/3 of organizations feel that being more diverse has improved trust and collaboration in the technology team. 6 in 10 that it's improved business engagement. Over half in your region feel that it's increasing risk tolerance, and it's simply providing better access to skills. But from a gender perspective, the news isn't as good. The proportion of women in technology leadership positions, it remains stubbornly low around the world. There is some progress being made in some regions like Latin America, which is benefiting from specific programs designed to get women into the world of technology. The lower Gulf and ASPAC regions are, again, lagging at the bottom of the quartile. However, there are increasingly encouraging signs coming out of your region that women are leading in innovation and startups, STEM programs, large multinationals bringing in expat leaders from around the world. There's stories everywhere. Regardless, I think the message here is that there's a lot more intentional work that needs to be done to diversify the leadership in IT. So clearly, we're all taking part in one very big social experiment out there. Only time is going to tell where this is going to take. I'll wrap up this now, and I'll hand it back over to you, Wajdi, to open up our panel discussion.
Thank you, Steve. These are really very interesting insights from the Global CIO Survey. And now I'd like to invite our esteemed panelists to share their first-hand perspectives on technology trends in 2020 and looking forward. So first, I would like to welcome Raed Kuhail. Raed is Executive Director of Information Technology at the Department of Tourism and Commerce Marketing in Dubai. As part of his responsibilities, Raed is also driving the digital transformation agenda at Dubai Tourism. Welcome, Raed. Krishnan Gopi, he's a Chief Disruption Officer at GEMS Education. Krish is in charge of Group Digital Transformation, Technology, EdTech, Process Engineering and Automation, and Information Security across all GEMS education schools and multiple GEMS Group service entities. Welcome, Krish. Nitan Chopra, Chief Technology Officer at Dubai Holding. Nitan is responsible for driving digital analytics and technology outcomes for the overall group and for co-creating new digital business models. And welcome, Nitan. And of course, Steve Bates is our global leader of the KPMG CIO Center of Excellence. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining.
Morning.
We will start with questions on board-level technology and investment priorities. So first, I would like to turn to Raed. And Raed, according to the survey that was just presented by Steve, almost 50% of technology leaders expect budgets for IT to increase. Do you expect an increase in Dubai Tourism's technology budget also in 2021?
Yeah, thank you, Wajdi, for the question. And it's great to be back with everyone, with your esteemed selves. Regarding the budget, from an IT department and an organization point, I foresee that the budgets could potentially be the same or maybe go a little south. And this is the way Dubai government is controlling the expense and dealing with the risk of the unknown. However, from a technology spending point, I foresee that there will be an increase in the technology spend, especially regarding the business managed units, which is a trend we talked about last year. And this year I saw it in the report as well. And I would like to share with the group here is that personally, that was one of my takeaways, that business managed IT units is a reality. And for CIOs, it is better to embrace them and support them and be part of the process. I saw that when the CIOs are involved and part of the sign-offs, there will be better results. And sure enough, this was personally my takeaway, and the results have been amazing. So from the overall department, maybe there's not much budget increase, and I think your survey has kind of shown that, similar to what Steve has shown us in the leisure sector. But from the technology point, I foresee that there will be additional spend. Wajdi, you're muted.
Okay. Somebody muted me. Thank you, Raed. Turning to Nitan now, how did the pandemic impact Dubai Holdings' long-term planning for technologies? And what new technologies have you introduced to cope with the disruptions that are caused by COVID-19?
Yeah, I mean, good morning, everyone, and thank you for the question. One of the good things we had done pre-COVID was laid down a clear digital strategy and plan, right? Digital transformation strategy. As you know, in the context of a large enterprise, this is such a huge cliche, digital transformation. So most people don't really know what it means in a large enterprise, right? So we had done that, fortunately, clearly laid down the plan and the strategy, which basically has these dimensions, right? One is impacting your existing business model. So digitization of your existing business model, but not just linearly, doing it in a linear fashion, but exponentially impacting the outcomes, right? In the existing business model. Then experimenting with new business models and launching new business models. And while doing all of this, building some rich digital capabilities and transforming the mindset. I mean, that broadly is the transformation strategy. So what happened during COVID? I think the digitization bit of the existing business model definitely got accelerated, right? I have not been as busy in 2020 ever. I mean, we've been so busy, the whole team, right? And what do I mean there? To give you some examples, opening up new digital experiences for our hospitality business, for example. Jumeirah.com today in 2020, and we recently got a digital experience award for this, looks very different, from what it looked in 18. So we transformed the experience for hospitality. We launched some new channels for leasing business, end to end, fully digital, including payments, right? And we then didn't leave our employees behind, right? Because transformation is not just about customers, it's also about employees, right? So we launched a platform called One, where we deeply engaged our employees with. We launched some new services. For example, within the Dubai Holding setup, we have a grocery business. So being able to do same-day delivery using one platform to our employees was something that we launched. So digitization of the existing business definitely accelerated. But I must say the experimentation and launching of new business models, new digital business models, definitely slowed down a bit during at least the core of the pandemic period. But as we now look at some green shoots, we are trying to push that. Yeah, and then capability and mindset, is a long-term activity in any case, right? I mean, miracles happen overnight, but capabilities and change and mindsets take time, right? So those things are slow and steady, and AI capabilities, cybersecurity capabilities continued pretty much as is, right? So for me, this was the broad summary of the impact of COVID to our digital strategy.
Great, thank you, Nitan. Let me turn back to Steve. Steve, you mentioned that earlier that the pandemic has created a new culture of remote working, right? What are the key, I think obviously everybody knows that, everybody's now working remotely, but what are really the key challenges that organizations are facing with workforce enablement, and how are they leveraging technology to deal with them?
Well, actually, there's an absolute list of concerns that I think both the executives as well as the CIOs have on this front. I think one of the basic challenges is is the productivity gains that we experienced actually sustainable? There's a lot of data that's coming in right now that's saying it's not. That in the early days of the pandemic, it was simply because people were working longer. The borders between work and home became very blurred very quickly, and people were putting in simply more hours, not necessarily being more productive. And I think now we're starting to see, after 8 or 9 months into this, we're starting to see that the impacts of that it is not easy to maintain this level of pace and productivity. So then there is a significant concern around what that means to morale, what that means to retention in some industries, and people having to make hard choices around if it's a dual partner home working, with children, for example, do they both continue to work in this model? Is it sustainable? That's a big deal. I think another thing is the culture of collaboration itself, especially in technology, where more modern ways of working, like Agile, like product management, like DevSecOps, really rely on persistent teams who are working together in often a co-located environment. You're simply more creative when you are around your peers, again, multidisciplinary peers. Difficult to do in a remote setting. And I think a lot of chief technology officers are experiencing that now, and they're working on ways to overcome that. And I think the last issue, this is certainly the number one global issue off of the survey. It's number 4 for the lower Gulf, is around simply the security risk that has been put in place as a result of relocating half to 3/4 of the workforce remotely. Spear phishing, malware attacks, much more complicated moves from threat actors for ransomware. They're up in some cases 500 to 600%, and they're all targeting corporate workers now working remotely. While at the same time, the production systems, the operational systems are still very stable. So the way in is through these remote workers. And so it's really now a new internal threat. So CIOs, CTOs, CISOs, they are all up at night thinking about these. I'm sure Krish, Nitin, and I would say the exact same thing in some respects. They're applying a lot of good technology. The first wave was around collaboration through cloud. The next wave, I think, is around augmentation of what can we do to make our workers more informed, more connected. And I think the wave after that will be, what are the strategies that you're going to do to allow people who need to be back in the workplace, the hybrid environment, to do it. So all very challenging things to consider over the next 6 to 12 months.
Thank you, Steve. Let's turn to another topic, and let's talk about the top emerging technologies. You mentioned a few earlier, Steve, but I would like to turn to Krish. Krish, as part of your work, you're involved in a number of process automation and intelligent automation. And obviously, you know that businesses can quickly make a headway on their digital optimization initiatives by investing in robotic process automation and cognitive automation. And based on your experience, what are the key considerations to enable a successful RPA transition?
Thank you, HD. Good morning, everybody. Having led dozens of RPA programs, some successful and some not so much, let me share with you some live lessons on what I think are key considerations to the successful RPA initiatives. I have 7 bullet points. Number 1 is clearly understanding and making people understand what is RPA and what it is not. That is a key thing, right? You would be surprised to know that most of your key stakeholders don't know this that well. RPA is defining software bots to execute set of repeated tasks in a manner that mimics the humans. As exactly how a human would execute some task. Now, you would be surprised to know how many of us have a different thought about what RPA is, and clearly explaining to people that RPA is not humanoid robots. RPA is not a physical one. They can't be emotional. They can't be sympathetic. They can't take all their decisions on their own, at least not yet. And they do have huge They have huge advancements of cognitive automation, but they're miles away from replacing humans entirely. These are all the things we need to make people understand. That's number one. Number two, having a good start. My suggestion would be to start with a detailed business process re-engineering exercise. It's absolutely critical to optimize your processes before automating it. We do this mistake quite often, right? Let's be clear. Automating a bad process does not make it any better. Actually, it makes it worse. So the second point is about having a good start. The third one is define the objective of an RPA exercise very, very clearly. Are you doing this for reducing your turnaround times, increasing controls, or increasing efficiencies? Or are you doing it for reducing your cost overheads? Are you reducing headcounts? I think we need to be clear on what your objectives are, because that drives what processes will you automate, how soon will you do it, how big is the team, etc., etc. Number four, be realistic. How much can you automate? Not all processes are good candidates for automation, and just having a over-reliance or over-expectation on RPA is going to be really, really bad for the organization. RPA is not your silver bullet. It can't solve all of your problems, right? And as a famous saying goes, if ain't broken, don't fix it. That applies to some of your company processes as well. Number five, change management is the most important thing. Every single stakeholder needs to understand what is in it for them. As we all know, I'm sure my fellow panelists will agree with me that technology part is the easiest part in a transformation program. It's about change management that is key. So number 6 point, select the right tool. Some examples are functional richness, ease of implementation, scalability, security, total cost of ownership, right integration partner, local support. All these are very, very key in selecting the right partner. Don't go for the most costliest or the most fanciest, which doesn't have a right partner ecosystem or the right support, then you will fall on track. The last issue or the last consideration is RPA is not a technology project. It is not a stuff that can be done in IT workshops. It is a business-led initiative that is well supported by technology, not the other way around. So I just thought my live lessons, my wounds, I can express these 7 key considerations based on the experience that would help, a thing or two about RPA. Thank you, Krish.
Thank you so much, Krish. This is very, very valuable indeed. Let's move to another of the top emergent technologies, and I'd like to turn to Raed to talk to us about cloud. Right, Steve mentioned cloud and as one of the top technologies that were emerging or strengthening during the COVID-19. Based on from your perspective, how has COVID-19 accelerated the cloud adoption, and how is this, and whether is this applicable to Dubai tourism in particular?
Yeah, sure. Great question. One note about our line of business as the tourism department is that we're not your ordinary business. We are an agent in the middle of the entire sector that is trying to encourage success in the various with the various stakeholders. So having said that, I would like to first share with you guys that maybe resonating with today's theme, that for Dubai tourism, our operational work did not change much, believe it or not. Our customers have been affected. Our sector have been hit the most with this pandemic, but our DTCM operations, frankly, did not change much. And this got me to think a little bit, and I would probably attribute this to several points. Number one, we have gone through a couple of transformation initiatives in the past 7 years. Number two, I'm just being proud of being part of the Dubai government family. You guys remember His Highness when he mandated that all services should be online, and the very famous speech where he held the mobile And then he said, I want all government services to be on mobile. Today, we are really seeing the effect of this wise and amazing strategy. So that's a very important point of why we didn't need to change much. Because starting 4 years ago, we've never seen anybody coming here to stand in line to apply for a event permit, for example. It's been happening 100% online for the longest time. Plus, we sell the inspiration of Dubai. We sell the Dubai story. We try to inspire people with content and with digital experiences. So that's already been digitized from day one as well. And finally, because we don't sell a product, a physical product, like I said, we sell an inspiration, we really didn't need to disrupt, our internal operations much. But indeed, the customer has been affected, but our internal operations have been intact. But we felt that we were ready. Let's put it this way. We felt that we were ready when the problem has occurred. Having said that, there were a couple of services that were imminent to go on cloud because of the COVID. So that's still there, despite of what I just said about being already digitally enabled. For example, the Microsoft Teams and the collaboration, that goes without saying, and even that was offered through the Smart Dubai Cloud. Again, bragging about the Dubai government and our capabilities here. But also, for example, things like Dropbox that was acquired immediately. And more importantly, our project management tool, which is on the cloud, which has now become a pillar in our operations. So this is something that is a permanent mark, a permanent positive mark that COVID has pushed us into acquiring when it comes to cloud, because now we're using this project management tool to even plan our campaigns, which is a fundamental part of our mandate and our business here in Dubai Tourism. But one last point, even though cloud is definitely one of the biggest trends that could have possibly been affected, and this is something that we have embarked on previously through Azure and through AWS, even as an infrastructure as a service, but also I believe other trends have been affected based on the type and the nature of the business. For example, in our case, the omni-channel strategy was sped up a little bit because of the COVID, where we were able to spin off a mobile app, a native mobile app, within 3 weeks, leveraging our original omni-channel platform strategy for our holiday homes platform. We created a mobile app that tracks the quarantine residents that are staying in the designated holiday homes buildings, to be able to track their 14-day stay, get feedback, check them in, check them out. And that was our role in participating in helping within the pandemic. So yes, cloud has been accelerated, but I feel also other technology trends have been accelerated as well, depending on the business.
Thank you, Rad. Thank you very much. This is very insightful. Turning back to Nitan, so from Dubai Holdings' perspective, which emerging technologies have you or are you contemplating to invest in the future? We talked about cloud, we talked about automation, we talked about marketplace platforms. What about Dubai Holdings? Where are you making your bets?
I think 2020's most famous word, please unmute, or we can't hear you. Apologies for that. Yeah, so perhaps two perspectives, right? One is on technology. Yeah, and I think technology trends, AI and fast and big data's infusion into business processes, customer service, operations, ways of working, employee care, right? So that trend will accelerate and continue. We are probably also bullish about, blockchain has had a number of winters and not much has happened in the enterprise world, but this whole concept of tokenization based on asset-backed tokenization in the real estate world. So we're looking at blockchain from that perspective. I would love to see mixed reality, AR, VR applied to, the biggest ticket item, right? I mean, we can sell hotels online, we can sell leases online. And the big question, can we do a complete home sale end to end digitally online, and there, you need that physical experience. So maybe exploring that and experimenting with it, because we don't know the answer. Then, of course, on the horizon is quantum, right? So these are, this is not rocket science. Pretty much everybody is investigating these. But I tell you, I'll share with you one hypothesis of mine. Finally, technology implementations, digital transformations, change management is all about adoption, isn't it? I mean, if our users don't adopt it, there's no value, right? And and the adoption follows this bell curve, right? The innovators are off the blocks, right? They will be the first one. You give them something, they'll run with it. Mobility, cloud, the whole shebang, right? Then there is the rigid middle, right? The folks who wait, play the waiting game. Maybe I shift left, maybe I shift right, depending upon how the breeze is blowing, right? And then you have the cynical, right side, which says, over my dead body, I ain't going to shift, right? But what's happened with COVID in terms of adoption, I think there has been en masse forced adoption, right? Yeah. Imagine, digital signatures. Yeah. We still have these wet signatures, but just imagine if you're a person executive who has to authorize something, there will be a poor bloke who'll drive to your door. You have to get out of your garage, right? Wipe your hands, make a signature, so it's everything has been a forced adoption. And my hope and hypothesis is that the shift in the middle, right, the rigid middle towards the left, which is get them to adopt faster, is perhaps a permanent change in, which will help technology adoption, digital transformation for a long period after COVID is over and done with, right? So these two perspectives, I mean, there is a technology perspective, which is pretty similar to what the rest of the world, but also there is an adoption perspective, which I think there has been a tectonic underpinning change.
Thank you, Nitin. I like this adoption perspective. Indeed, it's not only about implementing the technologies or betting on the technologies, it's which ones will be adopted at the end of the day. That's very, very valuable. Turning now to Krish, and I would like to hear from you. I know you've been experimenting with a number of digital offerings, especially that the education sector has been probably one of the most impacted by the pandemic and the lockdowns. And so could you perhaps tell us about your top digital offerings in 2020 and how effective they were in achieving your objectives? Steve mentioned earlier a number of objectives such as customer engagement, customer experience, satisfaction, etc. How effective were your digital offerings in 2020?
Thank you, Steve. I think 2020 is the most interesting year in the recent times. At GEMS Education, before or after COVID, we always believed that learning never stops. When this pandemic hit us, the ask of our industry was huge. Now, suddenly, it was to take the schools from brick and mortar and to go completely online, right? I vividly remember that day. We were in a meeting with all those regulators, with all those private school operators. And when the regulator asked the schools, how are you guys ready for the remote learning, complete remote learning? We were one of the very, very few school groups which said, we're ready, when do we start, right? And that kind of a super readiness did not happen overnight. Over the years, we've spent significant time and efforts in developing our own intellectual suite of property, technology solutions, custom built for education ecosystem for a decade or so. So it was that years of sustained investment in technology, our people, our processes that helped us to be absolutely ready for this pandemic. Now, we've delivered, just to give you some perspective of numbers, we've delivered around 28.5 million collective remote learning sessions during that lockdown period, with 96% of student satisfaction. That's huge. That's absolutely mind-boggling. And our remote learning capabilities were well managed through our own intellectual suite of properties, systems, and then other external solutions as well. For an example, let's take Phoenix Classroom. It's an end-to-end learning management system that has the capabilities of using AI and ML techniques as well, where students, teachers, parents all come together to have a seamless learning and teaching experience, whether the students are in physical classrooms or they are in their homes learning remotely. Now, KHDA, was rating all our remote learning, digital adoption, maturity across all the schools. And happy to let you know, every single school that we had has been rated as the top tier developed status in terms of the digital maturity and the remote learning offerings. And an independent survey conducted by a global organization called LEK Consulting, they kind of assessed that our parents are 95% satisfied, 15% more satisfied as compared to an average UAE school. That kind of tells you that it was a huge successful digital transformation, and that's why I felt it was most interesting year. And what we have been able to with our technology transformation is to enhance the end-to-end digital proposition, drive greater internal and external customer satisfaction, consistent pedagogy experience through our consolidation, standardization techniques, better analytics and better decision-making capabilities, and to become a competitive advantage, increased efficiencies. We've saved over the last 2 years through this technology transformation, 13,000 man days, equivalent of efforts that, through our intelligent automation. And of course, increased IP adoption, reducing external reliance on third-party software, which we had to spend millions of dollars. So overall, it's been a great year for GEMS Education and education as a whole.
That is really fantastic to hear, Krish. Steve mentioned earlier that the most successful companies or the leading organizations, digital organizations, are not the ones that reacted quickly. They are the ones that have been prepared or have been preparing for this for the past several years. And clearly, GEMS Education has been doing just that. For the past 10 years, you've been disrupting the world of education. And that's why, for you, it was the most exciting year, probably because you saw the result of your work. So congratulations on that, really.
Thank you.
We probably have one last question. Steve, if I may turn to you. As organizations adapt to new digital worlds, CIOs, you mentioned earlier, are at the forefront of leading the transformation, right? And from your experience and insights from the global perspective, how do you envisage the future of IT, and how is the role of the CIO evolving in light of the new reality?
Well, I think you've heard a lot of stories just in the last half hour talking about what I think good looks like for the future of the CIO. I think that the future of the CIO has a lot more to do with impact on the top and bottom line than it does have to do with the impact on IT for IT metrics. So I think, again, leading CIOs will organize and measure their teams around explicit business or constituent measures, like you've heard here today. Everything was about business outcomes or about mission outcomes, and I think that is a hallmark of a digital leader. I think the other thing that you'll see is scaled adoption of more modern ways of working and modern architectures. In a lot of countries around the world, a lot of CIOs, they're still sitting, I think what we heard before, in that kind of stubborn middle. There's a lot of what I call serial dabblers, people sitting and experimenting, but yet they're not pushing to scale. Digital leaders simply push to scale quickly, and they understand that there's an imperative to do so because the very nature of their economic recovery hinges on their technology strategy enabling it. So I think that's a big push. And I think the other characteristic, if you will, is that the digital leaders out there are going to put trust at the very center of their design. They're not going to take security, compliance, regulatory issues and keep them at the end of the value chain. They're going to do the shift left and embed it from ideation all the way through engineering and operations. That's a big, big shift for a lot of organizations. It's also the reason that cyber skills and risk skills are the most sought after. But the organizations who get that are going to have that trust index that is simply, that it's going to reinforce the strength and positivity of their brand and create, again, more competitive distance and differentiate themselves. So I think those are a few of the many things that I think are in store for the CIO in 2021.
Thank you, Steve. I think we're running out of time. I'll just take, if you allow me, one question at least from the audience, and I would like to perhaps turn to Krish, if possible. The question is related to InfoSec and the InfoSec team. Do you see more of a hard approach from InfoSec teams where we have less flexibility and building old-fashioned Chinese walls, or rather advanced security methodologies and tools? You know, security is probably one of the most critical areas that CIOs have been investing in, but what kind of approach are we really evolving into?
So education is the third largest attacked industry for the last continuous 4 or 5 years. And, what we have seen in this pandemic is the number of threats, whether it is phishing attacks or, whether it is about ensuring that, the man in the middle, the DDoS or whatever threats that are there, we see at least a 3-fold increase in the threats that we have seen in the normal scenario. So in that sense, it is really, really important that we take a very cautious approach, understand the threats from a post-COVID scenario, from a remote working scenario, and to ensure that the controls are very, very tight, at least until we understand how the post-COVID scenario is going to be panning out, rather than taking an approach where it would be detrimental to your own brand and your own reputation and the safety of your customers.
Thank you, Krish. Let me try to go a little bit over time and maybe ask Nitin one more question from the audience. Steve talked about earlier about the mental health issue, and particularly, I think in the UAE, it is a little bit more accentuated compared to the global findings. Are you concerned with the mental health and well-being of your team? Of course, you're going to say yes, but what are your tips and advices to technology professionals to cope with the facets of the pandemic impact? And I think you're on mute, Nitin, again. Sorry.
Not again. Yeah, one is definitely worried about this, right? I mean, you see it, right? Prolonged periods of staying at home, very little human contact, and a lot of my colleagues have shared, the issues that they face, right? So how do you deal with it? I think, 2-3 big things, right? Engage. We deepened our engagement. For example, just the cadence, so the frequency, the amount of meetings with our employees, one-to-ones, or getting us together, getting them to brainstorm. So engage, communicate. I mean, there is no rocket science to this. And perhaps third is, that's another trend I've seen, this true empathy, right? I mean, people talk about stakeholder capitalism, a bit more 360 degrees view of, corporate life rather than just shareholder capitalism, right? And employees being a key part of it. So, I mean, to give you an example, very early on, right, within our larger ecosystem, largely driven by my dear friend, my CMO in Dubai Holding, we started this entertainment engagement with your employees, right? Not just office work and not just, one-to-ones, but we started leveraging our own employee base. So a chef in Jumeirah would take cooking classes, right? As I said, we launched some services, yeah. So I think that's very important, right? So you got to first be aware of this issue, right? Well, through the COVID period, beyond it. And then second, you need to up your ante, both on the engagement front and the empathy front, in my humble opinion.
I like the cooking classes part, Nitin. May I join one of your cooking classes? So let me take one last question from the audience, if possible. Raed, talking data, how effective is Dubai Tourism in executing data strategy, and to what extent this has improved decision-making process at Dubai Tourism?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel that our data execution has been very effective simply because it covers the entire organization data set, but more importantly, focus on critical business and applies the innovation there in predictive and advanced analytics. For us, we don't have a choice, Wajdi. We have to have a sound data strategy with a sound implementation, simply because we want to stay competitive, but more importantly, the global data privacy laws. And we market Dubai globally as a brand and as a destination. So we are obliged to comply with these data privacy laws to avoid fines, to avoid reputational issues, not to mention the death of the cookie and the cookieless world, which I'm not sure if you guys are familiar or not, but to us, the digital data folks, this was the pandemic. This was what mutated our data strategies from the inside out, as opposed to COVID. COVID didn't really change what we do, it just did a lot of it. We had more digital consumption, and yes, there was some little adoption, but the silos, the walled-in gardens of Facebook and Google, the death of the third-party cookie, this mutated our data strategy, and we had to react accordingly, and so did the world, specifically in publishing and in the ad tech space. So because of these challenges, we are very data-driven, and we wanted to ensure that we can react accordingly. Listen, we're number 4 in the world. We're the 4th most visited city in the world. And there's a lot of energy that goes behind this to maintain and even, inshallah, have a better ranking. Whether it's big data on the cloud, using cutting-edge DevOps, using predictive, all of this we had to build in order to start incorporating advanced and predictive analytics into our core operations, i.e. our annual marketing plan, which is basically the secret sauce of how we disperse our investments and how we communicate to the world. We do have a handful of AI implementations through partners, but we choose to refine those implementations before we go horizontal and have further implementation. So overall, I'm pretty happy with the efficiency and the efficacy of our data implementation.
Thank you, Raed. Thank you very much. This ends our CIO forum today. Thank you for joining us today for this 22nd edition of the Global Survey. And a big thank you to Raed, Krish, Nitan, and Steve for sharing your very valuable experiences indeed. I look forward to seeing you all next year for the 23rd edition of the CIO survey. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Wajdi. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.